Congress just sounded the alarm, and this signal isn't coming just from the political opposition. It's coming from the very heart of the American constitutional system. What is happening right now between the White House and Capitol Hill could redefine the rules of military engagement for decades to come. And meanwhile, American soldiers are deployed in Iran, not in Syria, not in Iraq, in Iran. Let that sink in for a second. American troops on Iranian soil, following a military strike unilaterally ordered by Donald Trump. No congressional vote, no public debate, no formal authorization. And now, part of the American government is saying stop, but is it already too late? Here's what happened. On February 28, 2026, American strikes targeted Iran in coordination with Israel, hitting Iranian nuclear enrichment sites directly. 3 sites dismantled in a single night. A military operation of unprecedented scale, perhaps not seen since the Gulf War. And Donald Trump announced it after the fact, from the Situation Room, wearing his MAGA hat, as if it were a victory to celebrate rather than a war decision to justify. The problem? The American Constitution is crystal clear on this. It is Congress, and Congress alone, that has the power to declare war. Article 1, not Article 2, not the Oval Office, Congress. And that is exactly what Representative Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington State, hammered home just hours after the historic House vote. A vote that aimed to force Trump to end the use of American armed forces against Iran without explicit congressional authorization. Only Congress has the power to declare war, and we cannot put our troops in danger based on a president's unilateral opinion. These words don't come from an anti-war activist. They come from a legislator quoting the Constitution, and that detail changes everything. But here's what makes this story even more compelling. Pramila Jayapal is not new to this fight. She isn't seizing the opportunity to attack Trump politically. She said the exact same thing under Biden, the exact same thing. In 2021, when Joe Biden ordered an airstrike against an Iran-backed militia in Syria, without consulting Congress, Jayapal raised her hand. She condemned her own president. She said no, and today she wears that consistency like a political shield. I have spoken out against every Democratic and Republican president who has tried to wage war without authorization. This positioning is crucial to understand, because it reveals something fundamental about the nature of this debate. This isn't left versus right. This isn't Trump versus the Democrats. This is executive power versus legislative power. This is a constitutional tension that has run through American history for decades, cutting across Republican and Democratic presidents' approved wars and improvised wars. And it returns today with absolute urgency, because this time, it's Iran. And Iran is not Syria. You need to understand that to grasp the full gravity of this moment. Syria was an already burning theater of conflict, a country in civil war where foreign military interventions had become almost routine. American strikes in Syria were targeted, contained, and limited in scope within a geography already reduced to ashes. Iran is an entirely different reality. It is a regional power of 90 million people. It is the backbone of an entire network of militias and armed groups, stretching from Lebanon to Yemen, through Iraq and Gaza. It is a country that possesses a ballistic missile program capable of reaching American bases across the entire region. It is a nuclear actor in the process of enriching uranium. And that is precisely why it was struck. And that is exactly why Jayapal is sounding the alarm with such intensity. There are real troops on the ground here, unlike what was happening in Syria, and I think this is a much larger war with no imminent threat. Read that last sentence again. No imminent threat. That is legally explosive, because the War Powers Act of 1973, the law that governs the president's military authority, clearly states that the commander-in-chief can only engage armed forces without congressional authorization when the threat is imminent and direct against the United States. Not hypothetical, not potential. Imminent. And according to the Democrats who supported this resolution, Trump never demonstrated the existence of such a threat. He struck, and then he explained. On the Republican side, the response is predictable, but not without logic. Trump's supporters in the House argue that the commander-in-chief must retain enough room to maneuver to respond to foreign threats protect American interests, and act quickly in situations where the military window of opportunity is narrow. They also deployed a politically sharp argument. Restricting the president's authority in the middle of a crisis could embolden foreign adversaries. If Tehran knows that Trump must go through Congress before acting, doesn't that give them a strategic advantage? Doesn't that make the United States more vulnerable, not less? It's a seductive argument, and that's exactly why a small group of Democrats also voted against the War Powers Resolution. They don't support Trump politically, but they also don't want to tie the hands of the American president in a time of crisis. Trump himself didn't hold back against the opposition. He called Chuck Schumer and the Democrats losers, claiming they would have criticized whatever decision he made regarding Iran, a remark that perfectly captures the political climate in Washington right now, poisoned, binary, incapable of nuance. But beyond partisan politics, there is a question that should concern everyone, regardless of their views on Trump, the Democrats, or Iran. Who decides to go to war? This is not an abstract question. This is not an academic debate between constitutional law professors. This is a question with direct consequences on human lives, on American soldiers deployed in hostile territory, on Iranian civilians caught in a military escalation, on the stability of a region already teetering on the edge of the abyss. The power struggle between the American executive and legislative branches is nothing new. It goes back to Vietnam, when Congress, exhausted by years of undeclared conflict, passed the War Powers Act in 1973 precisely to prevent a single man from dragging the United States into a war without the consent of the people's representatives. Since then, every president, Republican or Democrat, has tested the limits of that law. Nixon challenged it. Reagan sidestepped it. Clinton ignored it in Yugoslavia. Bush used it as a starting point before obtaining formal authorizations for Afghanistan and Iraq. Obama struck Libya without authorization. Biden struck Syria without authorization. And now Trump strikes Iran, in an adversary of an entirely different magnitude, without authorization. The Democratic resolution voted on in the House this week therefore represents something larger than simple political opposition to Trump. It represents a Congress saying, enough. The drift toward the imperial presidency in military matters has limits, and we are going to defend them. The question that remains, and this is the one that will determine what comes next, is what now? The resolution was not passed. Republicans, holding the majority in the House, blocked the measure. Trump therefore continues to act with the full authority he has granted himself. Troops remain on the ground in Iran, the escalation continues, but the political signal sent by this vote is real. A portion of the United States Congress publicly and officially stated that the president is overstepping his constitutional authority, and once said that cannot be unsaid. Groups of Democrats have already asked House Speaker Mike Johnson to keep members of Congress in Washington next week, citing the rapidly evolving situation in Iran, which suggests that no one, not even in the halls of the Capitol, truly knows where all of this is headed. And that may be the most unsettling detail of this entire story. Not the vote, not the statements, not the political rhetoric, but this fundamental uncertainty about the trajectory of a conflict that involves Iran, Israel, the United States, and potentially the entire Middle East in an escalating dynamic where no one truly controls the breaking point. Jayapal closed her remarks with a warning that deserves to be repeated slowly, so it can truly land. She said that this war with Iran would have consequences far greater than American involvement in Syria. Not slightly greater, far greater. A phrase that carries the full weight of what historians, military strategists, and geopolitical analysts are repeating right now behind closed doors. Because Iran is not a fragile state, Iran is a structured, determined regional actor, deeply embedded in the Middle East's balance of power for decades. A war with Iran does not look like a surgical operation. A war with Iran looks like opening a door without knowing what's on the other side, and that door may have just been opened, without a congressional vote, without public debate, without Americans being able to weigh in through their elected representatives. That is the real story here. Not Trump, not the Democrats, not Thursday's vote. The real story is this. In a democracy, who has the right to take a country to war? And right now, in the United States, That question still has no clear answer.